everyone, and thank you for coming out on very, very short notice. Obviously, it is very disappointing to be standing before you to talk about the termination of the contract of our head basketball coach, Donnie Tyndall. I want to say up front that because of a public disclosure bylaw within the NCAA, and Jimmy Stanton can certainly direct you to that if you cannot get there on your own. There'll be times, and I'm going to open this up for any questions that you have, but there'll be times when I won't be able to elaborate very much, pending the question that you may have. But I will do my very best as within those parameters to answer any and all questions that you might have. This is not the outcome that we had hoped for when we stood before you a year ago. And I had the opportunity this morning at 7 a.m. to meet with Donnie. And subsequent to that meeting, I've had an opportunity to meet with the team, which for me is always the most difficult component of a transition, regardless of the reasons for the transition. Because they're young kids, and for some of them, they've just gone through this a year ago. And one of the things we've strived for is to get stability. And we had hoped when we hired Donnie that we would have that element in our men's basketball program. That is not how it has panned out as we stand here today. Having said that, this decision was the right decision for the University of Tennessee. It's never easy regardless of the circumstances. I also met with Donnie's staff, and that's also a tough meeting. Assistant coaches are basically tied to the fate of the head coach, good, bad, or indifferent. So that's never an easy meeting either. But those meetings were frank and professional, and we are now moving past that to the opportunity for all of you to ask any question, and I know you have many questions, that might be on your mind. And as I said, I will do my very best to give you as candid a response as I can within the parameters of the public disclosure bylaw. Most of you, if not all of you, have either seen or have a copy of the termination letter. That letter basically outlines, as well as it can be outlined, the potential and we think very likely scenarios. So you have that. I won't reference that or speak to that, but that is in your possession. So with that, I'm going to open it up for your questions again and answer those as they come.
If you got a question, raise your hand, Mary Carter, bring your microphone.
Let me say, too, that just so you know, I'll be here as long as you want me to be here to answer your questions. I want you to feel like you've had every question answered to the best of my ability. Afterwards, though, we won't do any one-on-ones. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask it now. There'll be time for the one-on-ones down the road, certainly, as we get into a transition of a search. But ask your questions now so that we can get those answers to you.
Dave, I guess hindsight's always 20/20, but looking back, do you wish you maybe had vetted Donnie more when you went through the hiring process last year?
Very fair question. I think we vetted that very well. It was very similar to any search I've ever been involved in terms of the vetting. And let me try to describe that just a little bit more in detail. When we vet a candidate, we talk to the president of the university, we talk to key people on the campus, the athletics director, the president, the compliance people. We vet also within the industry, people that know the candidate, people that have either worked for or coached against or know the candidate. We vet it with the NCAA. We say, are there any issues at the institution that this individual is working at? We knew about Morehead State. We read the report. We talked to Morehead State. The president had nothing but very, very gracious and kind and positive things to say about Donnie, as did Southern Miss, his prior institution. So we vetted that in a standard process way that you would vet that. is, knowing what I know now, I think what you're asking, trying to be kind with your question, is knowing what I know now, was that a mistake? Probably. That's a fair assessment. But, there are a lot of coaches out there that have a transgression in their history somewhere that had an opportunity to do better. And I was convinced at the time of the hire that Donnie had learned his lesson from Morehead State. So that's my honest response to that.
Dave, just to clarify, you mentioned probably a mistake. Are you referring to the vetting process?
No, not the vetting. I'm
The hire.
very comfortable, Ben, with
Sure.
the vetting. But what I assumed the question was is if you'd known all this now, obviously if we'd known what we know now, we would have moved in another direction.
I guess next question, can you kind of, and I don't know how specific you can talk about it, but can you describe the process with which you were able to receive information about what Tyndall could be facing in the allegations, and how does that work? How do you get a preview, I guess, of what he could face?
I can't speak specifically to that, Ben, but I can tell you that we have had legal representation in those interviews, a member of our council here at the university, and from our staff, who also serves as a legal liaison. We had an individual listen to those interviews the 2 times that they came to campus. We've also had dialogue when appropriate through those 2 individuals. Yes, recently I had a firsthand opportunity to engage in specific dialogue relative to what we could attain from those conversations.
Dave, just given the recent history and the turbulence within the program, why still pursue a candidate that had a documented history with the NCAA?
Well, again, it goes back to the first question. And, I was convinced at the time that Donnie had learned from that. And that's why I referenced the fact that there are a lot of coaches in the industry who have had a transgression but never had another one. Was that a risk worth taking? Not standing here today, it wasn't.
Dave, the timeline on this, did you feel like you simply had to act right now with the men's Final Four coming up next weekend, the coaches' convention, and that you couldn't wait and allow it to get to the committee infractions in July?
It wasn't about that, John, as much as it was about we had completed the gathering of information that we felt pertinent to make the decision. So that's, I'm not going to comment on anything that the process, because we're not involved in it from the NCAA's perspective and what will happen from this moment forward. But based on the information we had, it was a decision we had to make, and we made it. The NCAA doesn't say, hey, here's what we think. They don't get involved in personnel issues or campus decisions. So we made the decision based on the information available.
When did you come to the conclusion that you were going to have to terminate Donnie Tyndall?
Very late last night is when the decision was finalized, and Donnie and I met, as I said, at 7 o'clock this morning. I think I got about an hour and a half of sleep because regardless of the circumstances, these are always difficult, particularly in light of the transition that we face, that we're trying to become more stable in nature.
Here in the middle,
Mike?
David, I'm sure that you said you did a standard vetting process, but when you're interviewing Donnie in New Orleans or wherever it was, is there a moment in that interview where you say something to the effect of, Donnie, is there anything we ought to know about, or something like that?
Very much so, Mike. And we do that each and every time that we find ourselves in a search process in front of a candidate. Yes, we do that as well. And that brought the response from Morehead State. We talked at length about that. The people at Southern Miss, as I said, they couldn't say enough good things about Donnie. Yes, Ben?
Go ahead, Jimmy.
David, will there be any
buyout for Tyndall at all? And have you named an interim coach to take over the reins?
No, there won't be. His contract has been terminated per the language, Jimmy, in his contract, and it is effective immediately. And I have named Al in the interim role, and he's accepted that responsibility. This afternoon, I'll be meeting with the coaching staff individually. We've done 2 of those, and we'll complete that this afternoon.
You mentioned the conversation you had with Tyndall about the past. I guess, do you feel that he was misleading in what he told you, and how was your interactions with him during this process once you realized he was under investigation?
Nothing changed. We were very supportive of Donnie, and he knows that. We were extremely supportive, helping him do the job that he had to do as the head basketball coach. So no, we really didn't talk about this much, Ben. We let the appropriate parties do what they were doing, but Donnie and I didn't have much conversation about it.
Moving forward, what time frame are you looking at to find a replacement, and what budget for a new coach do you plan to use?
Well, the time frame is always a moving target, because you never can dictate or anticipate, how quickly or what quick turns in the road might occur that would delay the inevitable process of bringing someone to a formal contract. So it's hard to say the time frame. You always want to, you want to move as quickly as possible, but you also want to get in front of people that you think can fit the profile, do the job that needs to be done. So it's hard to say. And what was the other part of your question?
What type of budget do you plan on using as far as hiring?
We're going to, and I've talked to the chancellor about that, and as he always has been, he's been great about that, and told him that, we're going to do what we think we have to do and do it the right way and try to entice. Doesn't mean that it will, but try to entice people that we're interested in, knowing what they're currently making and knowing what it would take for us to have a meaningful conversation.
Mr. Hart, do you feel like the landscape for making that hire and the budgetary implications have changed because of the money that Auburn has put into their program, Mississippi State has put into the program in the last year? Do you guys look at that at all?
Well, I think the marketplace, and that's a perceptive question, I think the marketplace, particularly in intercollegiate athletics, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, or you agree or don't, is shifting dramatically for leadership positions. And all you have to do is look at the football marketplace and go back 3 years, and look at the basketball marketplace and go back 3 years. So the marketplace is shifting, and you have to be willing to get into the marketplace. Now a lot of that depends on the qualities you're looking for and the profile and the fit. And, not everybody's created equal in that regard. Some have more experience, some demand a bigger package financially than others.
And do you know yet if you will use a search firm this time around?
We are going to use a search firm. I've never used a search firm in my entire career, and have been in many, many searches. But this time I've decided to use a search firm, and told the chancellor that was my feeling, and he said he would support that. And we haven't engaged a search firm as I stand before you today, but that will happen, I hope, in pretty short order.
And was that decision motivated just by, these details cropping up after the fact? When you felt
No,
blindsided?
and that's a fair question too, and I can understand why you would ask it. It's a very fair thing to ask. But no, I think a search firm is not going to identify a candidate that we haven't already identified. That's just not going to happen. A search firm is not going to produce any different background search results than the background search results that we can establish and get through various means. A search firm would not have known what was going on at Southern Miss. Southern Miss didn't know. But what they can do, I think they can help with the confidentiality aspect in our world that is rapidly changing. I know you all don't want to hear that, but it's a fact. With social media and so on, I think they can help in that regard, and I think they can help expedite the calls and the research that we do. We'll still do it, but they can assist us in I think, 2 important components of the search process, particularly in 2015. Wes?
Dave, you say a lot of coaches have these similar backgrounds and something on their record along the way, but can learn from those.
I didn't say a lot. I said there are coaches, and you know who they are.
Given what's happened here, would you even consider somebody else with a similar background?
No, I would not.
Dave, I know obviously being a third coach in 3 years in football is a big deal, and it can detract a lot of quality candidates who see that challenge. With basketball, with the smaller scholarship numbers, smaller roster, do you think that'll be an issue with any of the candidates that you speak with, knowing the marketplace and going through a process kind of like this before?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
Do you think
relative to roster?
Yeah, do you think basketball coaches will be concerned about being the third coach in 3 years at a program?
I don't think so, Wes, because of the history of our basketball program. You know, we're still a top 15 in attendance. We have history and tradition here, unlike just about anybody else. If you look in the SEC, and Kentucky is obvious with their history and tradition, but, you know, we can get in that arena with anybody. And I think because of our continued support, which is outstanding and has enabled us to move forward with capital projects in virtually every sport that we have, you know, we've got a lot of exciting things going on. You know, we're up as it relates, and this is a credit to Craig Ulan and Chris Fuller and everybody in the Tennessee Fund. We're on pace for a record year. We have a good chance to raise more money than we've ever raised in a single year. You know, we have 1,200 new donors. We have an incredible number of donors who've already increased their donation, their pledge. We have a lot of positive momentum and excitement, and Butch and football have driven a lot of that. But I think that's contagious. That touches everybody in our program. Our donors, our student athletes, our staff, our fans. So no, I think that the University of Tennessee, we have a lot to offer, Wes. Now, the industry has changed in this regard. This is an opinion of someone who's been in the industry for 30 years or more. You know, coaches aren't as willing to jump. You know, they've done the assessment. If you know, if I have resources and I have facilities and I have a good relationship and rapport with the athletic director or the president and chancellor, good fan base, you know, do I want to uproot my family? I think that's at play more than the general population thinks. So it is a recruitment. It's no different than our coaches recruiting. It's truly a recruitment, and we think we have a lot to offer in that vein. Rick?
Dave, I know you obviously supported Donnie, and you mentioned publicly you like Donnie. While it's difficult for the program, how difficult is this for you personally?
It's always difficult, Rick. You know, again, leading is hard. For anybody that is in a leadership role, it's hard. But you have to have the courage to do what needs to be done in the best interest of the program, the university. I think technically, from a pure technician standpoint, Donnie Tyndall is an outstanding basketball coach. And you've heard me say that. And I thought he was a very good fit. He fit our profile. But none of that trumps what you have in front of you.
Dave, 3 quick questions. One is, did you have a rough draft of the NCAA allegations that led you to this decision?
No, we don't have, well, I'm not sure what you mean by rough. I'm in receipt of nothing on paper from the NCAA. What you have is the most pertinent information that I think is available.
Okay, and I think the Southern Miss buyout was $500,000. Was that already paid in lump sum?
Yes.
That was already paid? Okay. And have the 2 signees been talked to yet?
They have. Yeah,
their response?
You know, it's been good. I mean, they're young, Jimmy. Their heads are spinning. And we've also reached out to the parents of the other prospects. And so we've had those conversations, and those conversations will continue as the afternoon unfolds.
Dave, from a time right here in front, Dave, from a timeline.
Is that Brett?
Yeah. From a timeline standpoint, Coach Tyndall and his staff were very active on the recruiting trail in the last 48 to 72 hours. Did you give consideration to pulling him off the road? Why did you allow that to continue to happen right up against where we are today?
Because of the timing that we're not in control of. I can just say this. We had a very recent conversation that brought us to this point.
Just in terms, you mentioned you don't want anybody with any NCAA baggage whatsoever. Aside from that, what criteria are you looking for? Do you want somebody with head coaching experience? Is that mandatory, or just what are you looking for?
Steve, the profile hasn't really changed in terms of the fit. I think, yes, we'd like to get someone who has a consistent track record of success. I believe that, and I've said it in every search I've ever conducted and been involved in. That it's not an accident when you see that consistent level of success. I think we need enthusiasm in our head coach. We're in a day and era where the head coach of your football program, your men's and women's basketball programs in particular, and there are others, but those three are the most visible ambassadors on our campus, or on any campus for that matter, and they have to enjoy people. This is my opinion. They have to enjoy people. They have to embrace and connect the fact that they are a visible ambassador, and that this is a terrific community and an unbelievably passionate and loyal fan base. And they have to respond to that willingly and with enthusiasm. And I think that's part of our profile here. Then the other parts of our profile you've heard me talk about. They have to be able to recruit. That's the lifeblood of any program. If you don't have some elite athletes on your squad, then you're not going to excel. And so they have to be able to recruit. They have to be able to attract elite athletes to our campus. And surround themselves with a great staff. Nobody ever accomplished anything worthwhile on his or her own. That some people might think they did, but that just doesn't happen.
Dave, you said that you'll use a search firm, but what about here on campus? Who will assist you from on campus?
We'll do that internally, as we always have, John. We'll have some staff members involved in that, some of our staff.
And then following up, do you believe that the impending switch to Nike is more significant in a basketball coaching search, and will you look for coaches who have perhaps a past relationship with Nike?
We won't look for coaches who have a past relationship, but yes, I think Nike, you look at their place in the marketplace as it relates to marketing and branding. I mean, they are widely respected as one of the leaders worldwide. So young people know who they are, and in basketball, they do have, per your observation, it seems like a grander presence, although I can tell you our football team and softball team and everybody else in our departments, all of our student athletes, have talked about that and are excited about that.
Will you seek the advice from guys like Ernie Grunfeld and Allen Houston when it comes to potential candidates to kind of figure out guys they may think you need to look at?
If we're on a candidate that I felt like they would have insight to, yes, them or anyone else, yes, we would reach out.
Dave, obviously fans very frustrated. Who do you feel ultimately bears responsibility for this situation?
I do. Just as I bear responsibility for any and all hires that I've ever made, of coaches, of administrators, and I'm proud of my track record in that regard. But I'm certainly not perfect, and I've yet to meet that man or woman who is, and I'm certainly not. But I think, we've hired 6 coaches, inclusive of Donnie. Unfortunately, now we'll be searching for a 7th coach in the last 3.5 years. And I'm proud of those coaches, whether it's, you name them, Matt or Holly or Beth or Butch or, Brian. We've hired good coaches, but nobody has a perfect record in that regard. That anger, that frustration, that disappointment that is being felt, believe me, I feel those emotions, very much so. So I can certainly identify with what people are feeling right now, because that's why I slept an hour and a half last night. I feel those same emotions.
Dave, you mentioned that it's highly likely that Coach Tyndall will face significant penalties at the conclusion of the NCAA investigation. But if he doesn't, is there any concern about potential recourse on his part toward Tennessee for firing him with cause?
Not in my mind, Jimmy, based on the information in front of us.
Dave, you mentioned the frustration that you feel, and you can relate to how fans feel. I guess, what's the message to them headed into this new hire that, obviously this didn't work out the way you wanted to? What do you tell them to make them feel that the next one will?
Well, I'm not sure there's anything at the moment, Ben, that would ease that pain and that frustration, to be quite honest. But I think in time that there will be. And, again, part of the frustration is being driven not only by me, but I'm sure by fans in the transition that we talked about. It's gotten old. Now we've stabilized in several areas, but then here we go again in a key transition. So I understand the frustration and the feelings that are out there. But I said it earlier, this fan base is the most loyal, passionate fan base in America. And I've said this many times, in all of sports, in my opinion. And that, passion is a wonderful thing, and without it, you can't succeed. But passion comes in a lot of forms, and right now it is the frustration, it is the anger, it is the disappointment, and again, I feel it, so I can certainly emphasize with that.
Dave, you mentioned your emotions with this process. Can you speak to your conversation with Coach Tyndall and his reaction? How long that meeting lasted and what he said to you?
Well, we met at 7 o'clock, and it was a candid conversation, as you might imagine. Again, Donnie knows that, I was very supportive of Donnie, and he knows that. But obviously, if you're on the other end of that conversation, it's a pretty difficult conversation.
He expressed remorse.
No, and I hope you can respect this, I never go into details of those kinds of conversations. I think it's inappropriate. That was a conversation that was between us, and I thought he handled it professionally. But other than that, I wouldn't go into the details of the conversation.
Dave, is there any, knowledge or concern of any potential infractions that occurred during Donnie's time here, or do you feel like Tennessee is in the clear from that situation?
As recently as a very recent conversation, we were told we are not at risk.
And in terms of, you talked about looking for a consistent track record, I assume that means head coach, potentially. Are there any maybe high-profile assistants out there that you would consider, or does it need to be a head coach?
No, it doesn't need to be, Wes, but that's where we'll look. That's where we'll start. We're not going to eliminate any candidates based on their title or position, but we would like someone who's been in that chair and has had some success, a lot of success preferably.
How about SEC experience? Where does that rank? I know it's kind of a global game, so to speak.
It's a component, but it's not a necessary component. If you'll think back to a few years ago, a lot of our fans had that concern when we hired Butch. Well, the guy's he can't recruit in this league. Well, he's done okay there.
With the way the SEC basketball landscape has changed, with Mississippi State hiring a proven coach, Alabama making it clear that they're going to go after a big fish, and attendance being as low as it's been in 10 years.
We're 15th in the country in attendance, though.
But do you feel more pressure to find a proven coach instead of an up-and-comer?
No, I don't think so, because as you look across the landscape of college basketball, and college football for that matter, but let's look at, where was Billy Donovan when he was hired? Where was John Calipari when he was hired? Look at our own history. Where was Ray Mears when he was hired? Wittenberg. Where was Bruce Pearl when he was hired? Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So, no, we're not going to limit our search. Very fair question, and I understand your question, but we're not going to limit our search based on whether it's somebody at a mid-major, a major, a up-and-comer. There are always going to be rising stars out there, and then there are those established coaches. So we're not going to separate some segments of that as we begin the search. We'll look everywhere we can.
To get back to the marketplace out there, just to elaborate on that, Dave, you've talked ever since you've been here about the financial condition of the program. You say things are on a record pace. If the guy you want costs a lot of money, are you in position and able and willing to do that?
Yes, I am, and we are as an institution. But, Mike, I'll say this. I don't know what that ceiling might ultimately be, but we are willing to get into that marketplace. Yes, and that again is a very fair question. Back to your question about candidates and where they might be, and we have two outstanding coaches we've hired that were here, Holly and Matt. They were internal candidates who've done an outstanding job. Matt running men's and women's swimming and diving, and Holly taking over for the best coach that ever coached the game. So you find candidates and coaches in a lot of different places.
Dave, you've already mentioned this on some level, talking about the search firm and also not going after anybody with any NCAA baggage. But what are your other, lessons learned from this? What will you do different this time beyond those two things you've already mentioned that that you haven't done before?
Well, using the search firm will be different, as I mentioned. But other than that, we have a template that has served us well, and so we'll follow that template. In many respects, closely to what we have, with the exceptions that we've talked about. And I think, Dustin, you always learn. When you stop learning, you need to get measured for the casket, because you're learning constantly. So have I learned from this? I have learned from this.
Just, I don't know how much you can share, but just when the season ended, how optimistic were you that you were going to be able to have him back for another year? And if so, just kind of what changed? Was there like a final straw or something that...
We kind of knew, Steve, since November when we learned that there was an investigation of Southern Miss. As time went on, and as we had that ongoing communication at appropriate times through our legal counsel, we knew pretty much, okay, here are some outcomes that at the end of this process we could be facing. And we were hoping for best case, but did not end there. Ben, I'm sorry.
Dave, you mentioned some successes, and we're here because of a high-profile failure this morning. We asked Chancellor Cheek's office about his confidence level in you leading this athletic department moving forward. What do you expect his response will be?
I think it'll be a very positive response. I'm very, very honored and fortunate to work with Chancellor Cheek. He has been, as you've heard me say, nothing but supportive, as we have had tough decisions to make, as we have waded into some issues that needed to be corrected, as we began to look at our finances and look at our academic environment and potential problems that existed. And that's another very positive, by the way. Our student athletes are performing at record levels across the board academically, record levels across the board in giving back to the community and community service. So we have a lot of positive things, and I think those are the types of things that the Chancellor will point toward.
You mentioned you knew of potential outcomes about Tyndall as early as November. I guess, can you speak to maybe how you decide this might be a punishment we can live with, this is a punishment that we feel it would be best to part ways? Was there a breaking point, I guess, of potential punishments that a coach could have that you might say, okay, will bring him back and get through this? And what were those, if you can speak about it?
Well, I can't really speak to that definitively, except to say, Ben, that, we were hoping for a better outcome, a lot better outcome, of course, than the one we got. And, in our most recent opportunity to converse and communicate with the appropriate people is when we made the decision that this is what we need to do.
It was far beyond what you would have been comfortable moving.
Yes.
How did the team react to the news, and if some of the players want their release to go elsewhere, will you grant that to them?
Well, unfortunately, we went through that last year. And so those are case-by-case conversations that will take place and are taking place around the country anytime there is a transition. But we'll have those conversations, and we'll engage with not only the student athletes, but their parents or guardians or anyone that they're close to, and try to answer their questions. It's a tough time for them, as I said earlier, particularly the student athletes themselves.
Dave, I think Donnie had a 6-year contract when he was hired. Do you anticipate a similar length, or do you have any concern that you might need to go even beyond that, given that it will be the third head coach in 3 years?
And they've all been excellent questions, and that's another one, John. And I've started to think about that because your point is right on target, that security will be important. I don't know what the number of years will be, but I think the security will be important from candidates that we talk to.
Dave, you always say you have a list, you always keep a list. Are you further along in some ways with that list because a year ago you went through this process and vetted out multiple candidates? Could that even speed the timeline up potentially because you're ahead?
Yes, it could. And I think the other, and I can't recall which one of you asked it, but I think that coupled with the fact that depending upon the candidate and depending upon the circumstances, that I think we're totally prepared to get into that marketplace to the level that makes sense.
You guys, like you said, have done this recently. Would you be willing to go back to candidates that you had spoken with and interviewed previously, as close to the Tyndall hire as anyone off the board?
Well, Ben, as you know, I never talk about candidates because y'all do such a fabulous job of that. And I think a year ago there were more names in the paper than there are institutions at the Division I level. So I'll let you do that. But no, I do think that because we were in this circumstance last year, that certainly it might help in terms of what Brent said about moving a little quicker. When I say moving quicker, I'm only talking about the identification of potential candidates, not the process itself. Wes?
David, is there a time frame? I guess you said there's no time frame for when you will make the hire. Is there a time you can say that I need to make the hire by this time?
Well, you never know. Again, as I said at the outset of this session, you can't lock in on that, Wes, because you don't know what curveballs. Life doesn't throw all fastballs, as we can attest, and I can attest standing up here. You get curveballs and screwballs and sliders, and you can't back away from the plate. You gotta stay in there and do the job that needs to be done. But it's hard to nail down that time frame. But we will do the best we can to move in a manner where we've identified candidates and then we've had the ability to get in front of candidates. Dustin?
Just wanted to get this detail right. You mentioned a couple times a recent conversation you had with appropriate people. Do you mean the NCAA, and specifically can you say who that conversation was with?
No, I'm really not at liberty to go into detail on that.
Kind of a similar question, and you might not be able to answer it either, but you said in the letter says that you have an expectation of what Tyndall might face. You say you have no rough draft. Can you, explain how do you get an expectation of what he could face?
There is a bylaw that spells that out, and Ben, that's a good follow-up. In 2012, the NCAA changed the penalty structure. And when that change took place, they inserted the head coach responsibility prong. That component came into being, where the head coach is responsible for his assistants and all those who report to him or her. So attached with that, and it's in the manual, and you have it, Jimmy can give it to you. Attached to that is the penalty, the potential penalty structure. Okay, if you have a level 1 or level 2, or you have multiple level 1s and level 2s, then you can look at that graph, and it pretty much says that you're somewhere in this range. If it's show cause, you're 1 to 3 years, you're 2 to 7 years, it spells it out relatively quickly. Anything else? Thank you all. I appreciate you being here.